The following is a presentation of the Match Talk Podcast Network.
Hello, wrestling fans. It's time for the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. The World Wrestling Resource was made that you as a wrestler, parent, coach, or fan can have access to all the resources of the very best in the world of wrestling. I'm three-time wrestling writer and broadcaster of the year, Jason Bryant, and I want you to join me, along with John McGovern and world champions Terry Brands and Dennis Hall, as we talk training tips, topical discussion, mental preparation, and more on the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. World Wrestling Resource is sponsored by Defense Soap. Find World Wrestling Resource on Facebook at facebook.com/World Wrestling Resource and follow us on Twitter at WWRESO. And, of course, on the web at worldwrestlingresource.com. Now on to the show as we join John McGovern, Terry Brands, and Dennis Hall. Now up on the World Wrestling Resource, episode 39, brought to you as always by Defense Soap. Jason Bryant here with you after a nice hiatus. This is our first show of 2017. Our guest today, Dr. David Kirby, part of the International Network of Wrestling Researchers. He's actually the founder. We'll be talking to him about science and all sorts of things that go into researching not just the sport of wrestling, but the art of wrestling. Dr. Kirby, welcome to the program.
Well, it's nice to be with you, Jason. It's always good to talk wrestling.
Well, and the thing is, you're a part of a trivia question, and we're going to make you feel real old right now. And this is not a shot, but in 1971, there was this little thing called the Junior Nationals that started. Then it had a different set of alphabets, a different set of letters, the USWF back then. You were one of the first champions that inaugural year of the Junior Nationals. What do you remember about that event?
Well, I'll tell you, I remember going out to University of Iowa and being in the old field house and staying in Reno Hall, that tall residence hall next to it. And I remember, I'll tell you, I remember Sandy Stevens' voice because she did the very first one, and going way back. And here we're both kicking today, but Sandy's really gone on to being like the voice of USA Wrestling. But I can remember her from back in those days.
So it's the thing you remember the most is the announcer, not necessarily the competition. I find that. Let's see. Hold on. I'm actually going to do something.
Correct. Yes, correct.
I'm going to dig into the research right now. I'm going to actually look up who you wrestled in the finals just because I can. So actually, maybe I will just stop on that. But your career, you went from winning a junior national championship. You wrestled at the University of Michigan and were a Big Ten champion in 1975, correct?
73. No, 74. Excuse me. 1974.
1974. So, yeah, okay, Big Ten champion 74. And
my junior year. We didn't redshirt very much back then, so it was I just remember it was my third year. And, we had some great guys there. Jared Hubbard was our leader, of course, four-time All-American, and he had a lot of great guys.
Yeah, we look at that era back then, and when we see people win junior titles now, they're usually 3- and 4-time state champions or something like that. You were third in the state, and then you win a junior national championship a little heavier. What was that? Did that experience open up doors for you back then, or was it just like, all right, I'll go out here and I'll wrestle?
Well, I'll tell you what, I lost to in overtime. We had tied, and then I lost in overtime in the state meet to Rick Jones. He was from Detroit Catholic Central, a big rival, and he ends up being 2-time state champ and goes out to Oklahoma State and wrestles and is Big 8 champion out there. So I was wrestling pretty good guys, and I knew I was right there with them. But I would say my high school career wasn't as sophisticated. I had a good coach, but he wasn't overly into wrestling. And so I was just pretty much a grinder, and I did that throughout college. I really wasn't a technician, but it wasn't until I started wrestling in the off season with a guy by the name of Mike Bradley. He was a coach at Ypsilanti High School right next to Ann Arbor, and he had been 3-time Big Ten champion at Michigan State. And he was one of those guys that trained for the Nationals by working out with high school kids. And then, this continued up through college. But he was just a phenomenal guy, and he sort of put me onto opened my eyes to what's out there, and more and more sophisticated approach to wrestling. And it was during this time, of course, I started trying to read as much as I can about a sport, just to maybe improve my own training. And I just started digging and stuff. I can remember, just searching out anything. That was back in the days when stuff from, say, the Soviet Union or the socialist bloc was really, you got a snippet of information or something. It was even before videotape. So we hardly saw anything. And it was really caveman days, really. But I started collecting materials, and it just continued throughout my career and professional career. And it just became my avocation. And even though I got a doctorate, and I'm in educational psychology and everything, but all the work I've done outside of that, it's sort of like I was getting a degree as Doctor of Wrestling. And so I've got about 3,000 articles in my basement with as much published research on the sport as there is, I think. I think my library rivals that of the old East Germany library in Leipzig, which is still in existence, where they keep just tremendous records of all sports.
Yeah, and as a journalist, I sit there and I look back, and I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and wondering how many stories and articles I've written about wrestling. And the type of article I write about wrestling is vastly different from the type of article you write about wrestling. Scientific articles are known to be lengthier. You've probably quadrupled and quintupled the amount, probably even more than that, the amount of words written about wrestling. When it comes to putting a scientific article together about wrestling, what is the difference between simply writing a paper and what's considered a scientific article?
Yeah, well, I get that question quite a bit, because I have people come up to me, and I encourage people to do their own types of research, et cetera. But the thing is that in an academic publication, you pretty much have to have a thesis that's going to be a research question that's sort of valid. You've got to have a good review of what's currently out there, what the science says about whatever it is. If it's an experimental study, you've got to have some type of control where you, if you're out to prove some differences caused by some experimental variable, you've got to be able to show that those changes are indeed because of that experimental variable. That's where we come into the whole thing of control of the experiment. And it's not just an anecdotal thing. Well, this seems to work, and it's that type of thing. So it has to be proved, and then usually it's in many journals they're so-called refereed, where the submission is sent out to people who are somewhat expert in that area, and they read it and they make their recommendations whether it should be published or revised, this and that. So a lot of them go through quite a great amount of rigor in getting to be a final article or research paper.
All right, so I want to throw this one at you as a hypothetical, because I do a lot of research in terms of statistical stuff, in terms of
right. I've seen some of yours, and scoring analysis and that type of thing has a real good place. So it's not to be diminished. I've seen you assemble some real good groups of data on scoring and trends, et cetera. So I think that's very important. But go ahead.
Right. Well, what I want to get to that is, so, there's always that discussion about freestyling Greco-Roman. Does it help your folk style? And people, I've got a list. I think I go back to 1994 because that's as far back as I can track actual, I believe, entries, or I've got all the All-Americans ever from what we term now as Fargo. I have every All-American that's been in the NCAA Division I. I haven't cross-referenced those yet, but going back to 94, it's like there's a percentage-wise that I think it's like, I wish I could, I could even pull it up real quick. I think it's like over 60-some% of the Division I All-Americans in the last 23 years have placed or participated at what would be termed Fargo. So from a scientific research perspective, when you've got two sets of data and you want to say, okay, is this a correlation or is this a causation, or what terminology should we use to be like, if you want to prove that point, what do you have to do?
Yeah. Well, the thing is this, in something like whether participation in something such as say Greco and freestyle wrestling has an impact on your on our collegiate or folk style. It's one of those things where it's probably going to end up being correlational, because to do a true research in an experimental situation, you would have to have a group that you would withhold from that participation. And some of these things are just not possible. Some of these examples come up in maybe some medical studies where you're going to withhold treatment and something that you really can't do, because to prove that, hey, the addition of such and such has an effect. So it's going to be probably a correlational study, in that it's not true cause and effect, but you see a very big association between success in one and success or participation or success in the other. So, and I think it can be shown, and this can be very strong, even though, as I said, experimental research would be the highest level of scientific endeavor or proof. But this still can be very, very strong.
Yeah. So hypothetically, if I wanted to use that as a thesis statement, having the research already done, I'm probably better off there than I would be starting from scratch trying to come up with something. Say hypothetically, I wanted to go back and get a master's.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with doing a retrospective study, and it's going to be a correlational study. As I said, if you were to start from scratch and start talking about a certain treatment that you have devised, you pretty much would have to start it now and have some type of control group that wasn't receiving your treatment. But this retrospective type study, where you've collected all of that information, you can certainly perhaps even quantify for yourself the amount of competition into various degrees. So it isn't just a dichotomy of participated, not participate, but even the amount. And you could perhaps tease out a little bit more information or strength of relationship there between these two situations.
Good to know if I ever want to go back to school.
Participated in freestyle or not, that type of thing.
Yeah, I spent 7 years as an undergrad. I don't think I want to go back and get a master's after that. But moving forward in terms of what we're discussing, these are the type of things that you do.
Well, we'll give you one anyway. You put this into, say, one of our wrestling publications, and I'll grant you a degree. Just like I think I granted Stan Disick, he got a master's, and I've given him an honorary doctorate in wrestling.
Doctor of
so
wrestling.
Maybe we'll do the same with you.
I love it. Okay. I'd love to add that to my title. But as we move forward, let's talk a little bit about what you do typically with the group you founded in 2007, the International Network of Wrestling Researchers. And this seems to be, and I'm looking at the timeline here. You started this in 2007, and this is also an era where the previous leadership, then known as FILA, really didn't seem to be that open to outside assistance or help. And how did you start this thing, and how did you punch this thing through to really get the endorsement of then FILA, now United World Wrestling?
Well, it is something that I'm quite proud of, because it sort of grew out of what I mentioned before, an avocation. No one has ever paid me to do any of this work. It's something that I love, and so going back to 2007, I was at a FILA Advanced Coaches Clinic in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and I met two like-minded guys, one from Greece by the name of Professor Yanis Barbas, and another one from Iran, Bakhman Mirzai, another professor of exercise physiology that specializes in wrestling. And we just hit it off, and I can remember being in my room and talking about, hey, we've got to unite people of this kind, where we love wrestling and we're coming at it from a scientific standpoint, and try to you sort of get united and collaborate and share ideas and even propose certain things. And from that humble beginning, of course, aided by the computer, because this couldn't have happened, probably 25 years ago, but it could expand because we can share so much more. And even with the translation that's available, we just started making contacts all over the world, and it's grown to about 400 scientific professionals or professionals in wrestling in about 80 countries, 80 UWW affiliated countries. And so that's a very impressive group. Out of that, we started getting some stature because we started doing some things. we started holding meetings at the World Championships, scientific, conference, et cetera, where people have an opportunity to present papers like academicians need to do. If you're university-based, you've got to seek places where you can either publish or present your information in front of colleagues. And so we gave that wrestling sort of a nice forum, prominent forum at starting in Moscow in 2010. And that sort of, as I said, showed people that, yes, we are a good force or a group that can be a valuable part of wrestling. We appealed to FILA for a number of years, and with the help, I mentioned Stan Bidzik. He tried to help facilitate. We've had a very strong ally from Kazakhstan, World Hall of Fame wrestler Daulet Tulakanov, who was a great Greco-Roman wrestler. He's tried to support us, but you would get pushed down by bureaucracy. We would be at meetings and sort of waiting to come and speak, and then nope, we never got to that, or what have you. There were a couple of years of that type of they just brush you off. Then finally we made a breakthrough, and it was with Martinetti towards the end of his tenure, where he said, yes, we are going to establish a scientific, back then they called it a committee, and he let myself and my colleagues from the founders of the INWR just pretty much populate that commission. The only thing is, it was very, to me, a little bit twisted in that right when that was going to be announced, that was the time when wrestling was, set back with that sucker punch of not being or being put out of the Olympics. So it wasn't even announced that we had a commission. That took such a back seat to that big news. But we finally, as I said, were established in UWW with President Lalovich. He's been very supportive of having a scientific commission, because as we lobbied, we said, hey, every top sport has a research type of branch, and you want to have that type of concrete foundation to factually sell your sport, et cetera. So we're now we've just been sort of doubled in size as this past year, or just past few months. All of the UWW commissions were sort of repopulated. I had to reapply, and so we've got about 10 members now rather than the former 6. But that shows continued support for us, and we're excited about that.
Yeah, what struck me is you said 400 from 80 countries, and this is still, this is the 10th year coming up of the organization. It just, even with the internet the way it is, how does one coordinate this type of thing? And I've met David Lopez, who's out of Mexico. Yeah. He does a lot of video analysis, and then you mentioned Bachman, who had. Well, you mentioned
he's another example of a guy that sort of a like type of person, in that I would recruit, I would advertise, hey, who's out there, from your federation that's working in science. And I collected their biographies, and we posted them at our website, et cetera, because we started a journal, an academic journal entitled the International Journal of Wrestling Science. And I started that in my basement and just pretty much printed it up myself for the first few years. But now we've got an internationally known publisher, Routledge, who is our publisher, which increases its stature. But anyway, David was a guy that he would submit articles at a very, very high level of technical analysis for technique. And I was always astounded at, how did you do this? Well, he was self-taught. And I take some pride in helping David, bring him into the sphere of working with then FILA and now UWW, and he went from being the regional development officer for the Americas to now he's a specialist for technical analysis. And I take great pride in that, in the path that he's taken, and he's just offered so much from analysis of video that's available to so many people off of the UWW website using Dartfish, and all sorts of applications for coaches. So that's a very a great example of someone that just has sort of blossomed in the same era that our whole thing has taken off. And as I said, I take great pride in feeling a little bit of contributing to David's rise to prominence and maybe recognition of his talents.
Yeah, and you mentioned Bahman, who you introduced me to in Uzbekistan in 2014, because I needed somebody who spoke Farsi, because they asked me to interview all the champions, and I was like, do we know anybody that speaks Farsi and English? And you were right there for me. Didn't have to use him, but believe it or not, we had to use him maybe for an Iranian wrestling for Azerbaijan. So that was just the interesting thing about the whole thing.
Just to have in your back pocket. Yeah, he's a tremendous man, and another example of he was a wrestler of high ranking, and who went into the science side, and he's just an outstanding professor. He's at University of Gilan in Rasht, which is about 2 hours by driving from Tehran. And I've visited that university and spoken there, and it's a very, as I said, he's highly regarded.
When we talk science, so what type of things are you breaking down? I know that David breaks down a lot of video and scoring techniques. I mean, are we looking at injury rates from certain? What type of things?
Well, I'll tell you what. When I present what comprises the scientific study of wrestling, it's really interesting in that a sport that is so varied and so deep in history, et cetera, and so intertwined with certain cultures, you can look about just about all of the domains of or parameters that are out there that comprise knowledge, and it's applicable to wrestling. You can look at psychology. Of course, there's going to be psychological studies of the performance of the athletes themselves, the coaches, the people that are involved, et cetera, how to optimize performance. Of course, you've got physiology. I should have started with that, but all of the training parameters, not to mention the profiles of the athletes who are successful. That's always been an interesting thing for scientists to pick and probe at. Hey, what makes that champion separate from everyone else? Is it his oxygen uptake? Is it his strength, reaction time, or what have you? But wrestling is so multifaceted, as you know. There are so many components that can comprise a champion. And then you can move on. Nutrition, of course, huge in wrestling, and weight management. And that's becoming, and the things that we know about nutrition and weight management, I think we can really even share with society in general as we look at our problems that we have worldwide of becoming societies becoming more and more obese. Now we can come back and look at some of these things that we do as wrestlers, not the rapid short-term weight loss techniques, but just the whole idea of minimizing body fat and optimizing your mass, et cetera. It has a lot to do with that we can sell to youth and fitness and all of that. But it's a huge area as well. Then you've got sports medicine, injuries that are specific to a certain sport. I haven't done, say, research, but I've compiled a lot of things for USA Wrestling and developing they're trying to get a new concussion policy, for instance. So that's something that's on the, cutting edge, and we want to make sure that we've got most up-to-date information available in formulating these types of things. Then you can move on into how do you teach wrestling? The pedagogy, and that's more along the lines of education. You move into something sociological. Yeah, there are sociologists that study wrestling. Look at the advent of women's wrestling. That's a huge culture shift in the USA, of course, but around the world. Hey, you've got countries that are in Africa, they're male dominated, and all of a sudden there are women ascending. It's really a very, very interesting area. Of course, in the United States, a lot of the emphasis went into the legal side, right? It became a battle against Title IX, us versus them type of thing. Whereas in, say, Russia, when you investigate articles about women's wrestling, you don't see anything about legal battles. It's more about the actual scientific differences and traits of how best to train women as opposed to men, et cetera. And then finally, maybe even history of wrestling. We know that ours is truly the oldest sport, and we can trace it back further than anyone. Very, very interesting, and that we know wrestling is in so many cultures, almost every culture you look at around the world, historically or even present, they've had some form of wrestling. And that makes for such a rich field of study, and it makes our sport very, very deep. And then finally, I add on to that the whole idea about modern sports management, including marketing. It's very important. For instance, a guy in our country, Coy Cooper, he's got his PhD in sports management, and he's specialized in what makes wrestling attractive and what are its problems with it. So these are very, very important analyses that can really help our wrestling bodies, make good decisions in promoting our sport.
One thing that I'm curious about is what role the INWR played in rule changes as we, we're coming up on, this is the 4-year anniversary of when Rafi Martinetti resigned, and there was the whole Save Olympic movement that was going on. It was February of 2013. How much was your work and your organization's work looked at to say, okay, we've got to get these rules back to being something sensible? And you had scoring data for years here. So, I mean, what was the role that your group played?
You had mentioned David Lopez is good information. Dr. Harold Tuneman from Germany, who's been sort of like the father of that scoring analysis for modern wrestling. But just showing that, hey, where are these points coming from and why? The rules changes. It would have a spurt of, starting back was 2005, and they start instituting rules willy-nilly. It was almost as if two guys got together with a bottle of wine, and they might not be too far off, and decide, we're going to do it this way. And some of them were almost absurd. And created unenforceable situations. I'll give you the example that we all know about is, even though Rulon Gardner was the beneficiary of the lack of he broke his grip during that forced clinch in overtime. And, even though we were happy as heck for Rulon to win, and that was part of the rules, some people look at that as sort of like, that's so artificial, as a means of victory. But anyway, I give that example. Another example I give of the willy-nilly or nature of it. Remember when in Greco they had the rectangular box, and if you were going to do the reverse lift lock to start the match, well, you couldn't step in that box. Well, if they wanted you to do that reverse lift, you're not supposed to be bending over with your center of gravity outside your feet, which that box made. And that box rule was in there about 3 or 4 weeks before it was rescinded. And you said to yourself, who made that rule? So now I think we're getting more review. We have submitted different analyses to these bodies on a regular basis now, and hopefully the technical commission reads them and looks at them and tries to apply some of the things that we see. But that's one of those things you just hope for. Right now we've given recommendations for weight classes, for the new weight classes. I think we're all excited to see that wrestling, hey, we can go back to maybe our roots so we can develop within our own countries in non-Olympic years the 10 weight classes. This is going to improve our participation, et cetera, for all participants. And in the Olympic years we have to retract back to 6, and that presents problems because some of the principles you apply to creating, say, weight classes, it breaks down when you go back down to 6. For instance, one of the foundational things that 10 weight classes allowed us to do was to say, hey, we're going to have weight classes where it's equitable and perhaps even safe. So you don't have to move in an unsafe loss of percentage of body weight to get to the next lower weight. Studies have shown, recent studies, that usually it's right around 7 to 9% that you shouldn't, if you lose that amount of weight, that pretty much is the limit to optimize your say, gains in performance. Going over that, you don't. You can actually, your body, you can harm your body. And the Japanese have recently duplicated some of those findings. So you say that 7 to 9%, let's just say it's right around 10. Well, we can have 10% differences between the weight classes once we determine the spans. And so we're very happy with what we can present for the 10 weight classes. But of course, as I said, that breaks down as soon as you go to 6, because you've got much larger gaps that do exceed, automatically that say 9 or 10% difference in the weight classes. So sometimes science, helps, and sometimes, it's almost inapplicable. You try to do the best you can.
From a wrestling fan standpoint, because there's still obviously you're a fan if you're doing this because you care about the sport, you've been a part of it, you are the doctor of wrestling.
Yeah.
But when you look at the 10 weight classes, and this is something that, they're talking about, they added the 2 for the 8 at 2015, and then they had a non-Olympic Worlds in 2016. When we get to 10, what is the real science that goes on there? Because physiologically, the makeup of people around the world are different, because what we saw with the elimination of 48 and 51, those lighter weight classes, the Rob Eider weight classes, even 114 where Zeke Jones wrestled, we saw a lot of Asian countries lose out on medals because physiologically their culture have smaller people. You're getting also your Latin America. You look at California and their makeup of their lower weights, it's heavily influenced by Hispanic culture. How do you balance that?
Yeah. Well, David Lopez and I were sharing some things back and forth, and we pretty much thought it'd be ideal if we could have, say, 11 or maybe 12 weight classes that we could address all of those concerns, talking about the starting our weight class, the minimum, maybe moving it down a little lower, and then even adding somewhere they're needed to keep to that, say, 10% rule. But we think we can live with 10. But let me tell you, the battle for me has been, I am a proponent of lowering the minimum weight class. Just historically, you already mentioned some, the fact that we've had the great wrestlers there. If you looked at the old 48 kilogram weight class, what do you find? You find some people that were tremendous wrestlers going through history. And some of them were, as you mentioned, Asian. We've even had those North Koreans come out with, they're unknown at an Olympiad. No one knows who they are, but they win the Olympic gold. So there's another example, the Koreans in that category. And also those guys had some of the highest points per minute bouts for the weight class. So how can you argue and get rid of those people? Well, the thing is, it's just one of those things that perhaps the guys in Europe seem to dominate a little bit. I haven't gotten too much. On my weight class proposal, I put 51 kilograms. And the Serbian gentleman that's sort of running the technical commission says, well, even the Asian countries don't have those weight classes in judo and taekwondo. And I said, well, that's somewhat of a hollow argument, because those are the same weight classes that were sort of imposed on them by the IOC in shrinking all weight classes in all sports. I do have correspondence from Japan saying that they do. I mean, we can just look at the average weight of 18 to 34-year-olds, and the mean is significantly lower in Japan as opposed to, say, the United States and other European countries. And this would go the same in a lot of those other Asian countries as well. So I'm somewhat on an island in making that fight, but as you said, I was just answering your question as an ideal. I would say let's take advantage of this 10 weight class rule to lower that minimum, to bring back some of those guys, just as you mentioned, the Rob Eider type, Sergio Gonzalez from the 70s, great wrestlers. That was 105. I proposed 51 as the minimum, as opposed to saying, okay, weights around the world are going up, so we'll adjust that up 3 kilograms. But that's still meeting some resistance, and I don't I don't have a good feeling about my proposal in that regard for that minimum weight. Right now, some of the proposals are coming in right around that 55 kilogram mark.
Yeah, Bobby
Even
Weaver's still a little guy.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Now, as we continue on with how this stuff develops, then we get into things that are not necessarily scoring related. What are some non-scoring related type of research that we can do in terms of maybe actual techniques that score, not necessarily the actual total points? I mean, is there something that you guys are looking at the amount of single legs that are scored, the percentage of leg laces that score one, the high gut versus low gut? I mean, how deep in the weeds are we getting with this type of technique?
Well, I'll tell you what, that's an area where, David Lopez Gonzalez is really doing a tremendous amount of breaking things down. That hasn't been my forte. I told you I wasn't a technician. Okay. I mean, I'd shoot doubles until I could get the legs. But that is certainly being done. I think, if you wanted to maybe just open up some of the things that are out there, people are really working on what constitutes, athlete readiness or peaking for the top performance. What type of measures can we use to objectively look at our athletes? With a lot of sports, it's a stopwatch. We know, hey, they're within a certain range, but wrestling is not measured in that fashion. We are going against a human being, which is another huge variable right there. So what can we measure to make sure that, say, hey, Jordan Burroughs is really, truly ready? No, he needs some more rest. He needs this. People came to me using that as an example because can't we measure something? Well, there are some things that are being measured. I think that, you talk about blood parameters or different types of power outputs and things like that. But really from a true performance basis, a lot of the work looks at, I would call psychophysiological variables. That it's almost like if you're detecting fatigue, you can do things with, hey, what's the neuromuscular readiness of an athlete? Reaction. There's a lot of different types of measurements that can be done, almost like skin reactants and things, almost like use components of a polygraph. But they can tell you a lot of information. Heart rate variability, how your heart rates vary in that from beat to beat in different situations. They can detect overtraining, and here again, there'll be athlete readiness for a big competition. We're starting to do some of that at the Olympic Training Center. I was out there with Coach Lindland and Momir Petkovic talking with the exercise physiologists and, hey, what do we need to test? Because sometimes the exercise physiologists out there are looking at they haven't got the sports specialization. They work with a lot of different sports. And so I was bringing out there some what we call tests of special endurance for wrestling. And some of these have been developed in, say, Russia, et cetera, Ukraine. They really had done some advanced work on just measurements of lactate curves during a dummy throw test, for instance. And I know that the freestyle team, they're trying to measure differences in power. They're doing some power output tests on a rope climb machine out there. All the freestylers have been put through that standardized test. So we're looking at some of these things that we can start keeping track of. And I've been a big advocate that we've got to do some systematic testing. So we've got our record and we know if someone's in their peak zone or not just eyeballing them in the gym. But some of these areas, as I said, are athlete readiness. That's a real big area of importance to all the elite athletes, coaches as well.
Now, say somebody wants to get involved in this and they want to know, first off, where they can find and get the International Journal of Wrestling Science. How would they go about doing that? Well,
people can always get in contact with me directly, and my email is davcurb@gmail.com. So it's the first three letters of David, DAV, and the first four letters of my last name, curb@gmail.com. You can go to our website. INWR. Pretty much, I think Google that. It would take you there as well. The International Journal of Wrestling Science. It's a Taylor in the United States. It's published by Taylor and Francis, a division of Routledge. So Taylor and Francis, and you can go to seeing all of the issues, at least abstracts of all of the issues, and they've even got the ones from my initial, self-publishing, all digitized and accessible as well. So, those things are things that you can read about, and perhaps as you get interested in a topic, I try to share with people the actual researcher's contact information. So sometimes a coach can get directly in touch with the person who conducted the research that comprised an article, and ask them direct questions. You don't have to be a scientist. All of our work in wrestling science, it's not any good. Well, I mean, it might have some value, but the values of wrestling, if it can be applied, and that means it needs to be interpreted and made available to the coaches and the athletes in an understandable form. One thing that I know that you're aware of, I publish also a compilation of wrestling research for every year. Every year I do that. So I just sent out in January a compilation of all the papers pertaining to wrestling that I could find, scouring the world, and of course use that internet again. But then I put the abstracts in there so people can look at something. Oh, this is a topic that I'm interested in. What's some type of weight loss, or the comparison of different techniques on weight loss to injuries, to some of these more esoteric training type of questions. But I include the contact information, the email of the researcher, and most researchers are willing to communicate with people, whether it's it could be the high school coach that does a lot of reading, or certainly the college coaches that's had a background in wrestling. I think, and I'm certainly available, and I do that often when people give me a call. Hey, what's out there on this topic or that topic? Because they want more information. So we've got to, that's sort of been my role in this whole INWR business, is sort of a facilitator of bringing this information together, getting the people together, and then advertising it so other people can access that information.
Yeah, on the website, inwr-wrestling.com, you can find out all that information.
Right, yep.
And Dr. Kirby, yep. I want to focus on one more thing as it relates to the science portion of it. And these are these symposiums. And it's a big, scary word to people who don't know what symposium means. What is it? Where do they go on? And what type of discussions are happening at these type of events? And I've noticed that they're at World Championships now. They're not like off to the side. They're actually they're being embraced by United World Wrestling. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, in any field these days, whether it's sales to whether it's insurance or different things in the health world, all of our education, all of our groups have conferences where people get together and share what's most current. Whether it's a conference or a symposium, that shouldn't scare people away. Lots of times the presentations that we've had, they run that full range again of presentations. We had a Iranian coach give a presentation. It was Mr. Habibi, and he's working on his PhD. He wrestled Joe Williams in New York, in the World Championships. But he did a presentation on women's belt wrestling and the development of women's belt wrestling in Iran as a precursor to when they're maybe going to make that full jump to, actually wrestling. We have people doing that different types of scoring analysis of certain techniques. We had some young Japanese researchers breaking down what constitutes a good double leg. And they noticed that, by doing this type of, high-tech analysis with videotapes, that guys, they don't drop down as far They do their initial lowering and they're not dropping as close to the ground. Well, it makes sense. That's why Jordan Burroughs, he doesn't do nosedives into the mat. He's moving horizontally and with much less drop as he's moving forward. So little things like that, sometimes that just reaffirms what we already know, but it's just a point of emphasis. But people shouldn't be scared off by saying, oh, there's a conference, come in and listen in. There's always some type of kernel or tidbit that you might come away with that really sparks your interest. I tell people all the time, especially young people, there's so many students in our country that, they're master's students looking for that master's thesis topic or even PhD. But I said, why not have people studying wrestling if that's your love? Go for it. I even tell wrestlers, hey, in school, write your term paper on the history of wrestling or some scientific aspect of wrestling. You could just apply it to almost any subject, here in your own. And when we apply what we love into, say, a science, all of a sudden it doesn't become some weird thing. We understand it, we want to learn it, and et cetera, and we enjoy it more. So all of those things, I would say to people, it shouldn't be some type of strange type of thing. Break down and maybe identify with some of the simpler things that you understand and go from there and ask questions and just try to involve yourself in it, because we can make a lot of contributions.
Now, shifting gears a little bit to something that's more stateside, and that is the Jacob Kirby Award. And for those who are unfamiliar, your son Jacob was a Greco-Roman wrestler, went through Northern Michigan, passed away in 2010. And in memory of his honor and what he embodied for wrestling, you've presented the Jacob Kirby Award. One goes to a senior-level athlete, one goes to a developmental athlete. This year, the recipients were now retired Spencer Mango and Randon Miranda. First of all, let's talk about what as a father, obviously losing a child is got to be traumatic. I don't think anybody wishes that. But what was it about Jacob that really made you love wrestling again, as a parent, as an educator, and as a scientist?
Well, Jake, he was 25 when he passed. He had been a wrestler since about 5 years old. And just as so many young people out across the country, across the world, wrestling did so much for him, and they loved it. And he also had those traits that seem to shine in wrestlers. Let's face it, toughness. Usually they're humble and not braggadocio, but and very hardworking. All of these things people love. It's not always seen, but Jacob certainly possessed that. He had gone through. It's funny, even though he was our son, he was a hero to us, and that he had gone through a lot of different things. And it just seems that in some respects he had to bear some crosses. I mean, 12 years old, I remember we're driving back from his brother's participation in the national duels in Oklahoma. He has his first seizure. He had epilepsy. So from then on, he had to take, drugs. Were always worried. Hey, can you do this? Should he do that? But the thing is, in travel, hey, do you have your medicine, et cetera? And I know that it was tough to always be taking this. I think the medication actually slows you down a little bit. He used to be a fast sprinter, and after he started taking that, he slowed down. But anyway, then he goes through cancer. He as a sophomore in high school, he gets cancer. A rare form. We didn't diagnose it until I'm taking him from a disease specialist appointment, and they said, "Why don't you should go to Loyola?" And as we're walking in, Jake's he's starting to vomit. His eyelid is drooping down. We find out he's got this blood type of cancer called the Burkitt's leukemia lymphoma. It's sort of a rare, rather rare form of cancer, and it's throughout his whole body, stage 4. Well, the doctors, they know they have to blast him with, they said to me, 8 times the type of chemo that you'd be getting if you were having leukemia. And that type of stuff, as you know, the cure can kill you as well. And so he's in and out of tough situations there, but as so many wrestlers, the nurses loved him. So tough. Whether it was a bone marrow, thing, didn't bat an eyelash, all sorts of things. He was just a favorite of the doctors and the nurses, and he became our hero as well. He comes back just a few weeks after having a tube taken up from his chest for the chemo because he wanted to wrestle in this big duel at his high school. He does it, and of course he's exhausted, but he wins, and just that type of thing, the love of the sport. And then when we lost him in 2010 at 25, he'd just come back from Russia and was really feeling good about himself and on the national team again. And I think he's rated number 2 at the time because he had beaten Farouk over in Europe, the number 1 guy. And suddenly, after practice with Ivan Ivanov, he goes home for his normal nap before dinner, lays down, and doesn't wake up. So it's just to us, it was a thunderbolt. But then, of course, we wanted to do something that, you got to have something positive to work for, during those depths. And so we said, we're going to do some things in his memory. We had started the Kirby Cup, and then we also did the award. Actually, that genesis for that came from Steve Frazier. And so this, just a few weeks ago at the Schultz, we were a little bit behind. We gave the 2016 awards. 2016 was sort of a jumble with all the Olympic activity, but we presented the award to Spencer Mango, who was his achievements of wrestling. Of course, his career ended in 2016 with the Olympic trials, but what a guy. By the way, he's a teammate at Jake's, and it made it especially sweet. And then Randon Miranda, a young man that I met in California, doing great stuff on our junior world team, and they're looking for him to medal this year in the junior worlds. So just 2 more great guys to a list of, Chaz Betz's and Beziks, et cetera, Robbie Smith, who's won that award in the past. So we really feel good about giving that award out. It does say that it's an award for character and love of the sport of Greco-Roman wrestling. So it's always a joy for us to be able to make those presentations.
What's the one thing that you would want the wrestling community to know about what Jake's legacy was and what he means to Greco-Roman wrestling, Northern Michigan, his teammates when he was up in Boise? I mean, his legacy is going to live on through this award.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, people all over the place, you always get people come up to you and say, I knew Jake. And the one thing that comes through loud and clear is that, he was a hard worker, and he was up and comer, but he never put on any airs with anyone. I can remember I was talking to different wrestlers when they were up there with him, just saying that, yeah, he always had time for you. He'd work out with you. He would help you. He had a record of trying to help guys that ran into academic trouble. They'd get booted out of the program up there at Northern, but you could re-enter by getting a letter, like an appeal letter. And I think he was about 6 out of 8. He got kids back in. He would take the time to help, and share his insights. There was a lot of people, or a number of people, that actually said, yeah, they looked up to Jake. He's a colleague, he's a peer, but they looked up to him and they respected him because they looked at the way he conducted himself, in life that was just, a truly good, in a good fashion. And so it's all of these things always, you hear about that. And as I said, a lot of them are just the typical good things that we see in a lot of our wrestlers. Very, very humble, not just self-centered, but really had a good focus, and they, give their all and do the best that they can.
Been talking with Dr. Dave Kirby, the founder of the International Network of Wrestling Researchers. You can find more about this organization at inwr-wrestling.com. Publishes the International Journal of Wrestling Science. Does a lot of stuff with super nerdery stuff, but he still loves the sport of wrestling. He is the doctor. He is the doctor of wrestling. Dr. Kirby, thank you for your time today here on the World Wrestling Resource Podcast.
Oh, hey, thank you, Jason, and thank you for all that you do for wrestling just to create the excitement. And here again, it's my pleasure.
Show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.